On today's episode, we talk with Melinda Belcher about researching and applying customer perspective. Melinda is the Senior Director of Digital Experience at Mastercard and founder of a UX content design meetup in New York City. This is the Meaningful Content Mixer. We are your co-hosts. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Bonnie. This podcast is for content creators seeking inspiration across disciplines to create more meaningful content.
From pre-sales to post-sales, we want to learn from each other because we are experienced enough to know how much we don't know yet.
Let's get started.
Hi, Melinda. Thanks for joining us today. Now, you and I met at a conference a few years ago in the before times when we went to in-person conferences. And it's great to talk to you today.
It's great to talk to you too. It's lovely to see your face. Your hair has gotten longer.
Yeah, no haircuts during these important times. And I know you're meeting Bonnie for the first time today, but certainly in the same industry, similar experiences. But we'd love to hear a little bit about your experience, kind of your journey as a content professional and where you are now.
Sure. So I started a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, which is about how long I've been in New York City. And I started sort of developing to wireframes, copy to wireframes for marketing websites, I think as a lot of folks did. I was going to school, I was getting my master's degree, and I had a neighbor who worked in marketing, and she said, I would really like some help on this website. I know that you're studying writing. Would you like to learn how to do this? And I said, absolutely. So then I was suddenly writing the first website for Captain Morgan Original Spiced Rum. I did a lot of research for that site. I would like to let you know, which was not fun. Actually, I don't really like rum that much, but I made myself do it. And part of the other piece of that was that they gave me the login to playboy.com and told me that they wanted me to do a lot of research there and try to make the voice sound like that. So I know. So it was a very interesting voice guidance, but actually very rich and very easy for me to follow because there is a very definitive voice, or there was at the time, I don't know, on playboy.com. So I would sit down with a designer and we would actually make the wires together, which was crazy. I'd never done that before, and I didn't even realize that I was co-designing with someone, that we were figuring it out together. He would say, hey, what about we put this here? And I would say, oh, I think it needs to be a little longer. Let's make more space. So it was actually one of the most ideal designing experiences I've ever had, because I think both of us were just trying to figure out what it should be. And I was lucky enough to work with a designer who really needed and wanted input from the person who was writing the copy. So yeah, that was my first gig was in marketing roles. And then from there, I had been teaching English as a second language also while going to school. So I got a gig at the Girl Scouts of the USA, which is headquartered in New York, here where I am still today. And for them, I started managing their website for girls 5 to 11, as well as developing curricula for them. So again, a lot of focus groups with young girls, starting to research and understand my target audience and sort of figure out those types of things, a lot of research around what had already been done, a lot of benchmarking around how girls think and act and what they do and what they want to hear about and what activities they're interested in. And a lot of just listening to the voice of our customer, which was, girls ages 5 to 11, and understanding what they wanted to hear about, what they wanted to know about, and things like that, and kind of surfacing that not only on the website, but in the curricula that we developed. And I was able to conceive and bring to fruition the Daisy Girl Scouts curriculum, which is kind of focused on this idea of these flower friends and this main character, Daisy. And that still, I think, is what they're using today. So that was a fun experience for me, in that I was able to bring together two things that I really like, which is education, facilitation, and learning with the digital space, which was still at the time quite new. We just had the .com boom and everything was starting to come back. So working in the digital space was still sort of new and fresh and interesting. And from there, I moved into the world of branding and marketing for real. I was at Interbrand for about 4 years, and then Havas, another digital boutique of part of BBDO. I ended up embedded at IBM through another agency and set up a design studio for them in Tokyo, where we were building apps for the sales force there. And that's kind of how I moved into product from the marketing side of things, was
Mhm.
through that work that I was doing with IBM to really start building things and working in agile teams, which was so exciting for me. I really loved making something that wasn't a website that some people would
Yeah.
actually use, and putting it in front of folks and watching them interact with it. So from there, I moved then into Mastercard, where now I work fully on products and services.
Wow. So that's a lot of varied experience. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot recently, especially, is really understanding your audience. And one of the things that I love about you describing, some of your experience is that you talked a lot about the research that you had to do to really understand the audience that you're writing for. And to go from writing for spiced rum and having to understand that audience, and then going to the Girl Scouts and having to understand that audience, that's a very broad range. But when it comes to understanding who you're writing for, I mean, spending that time to do the research is key. Mhm.
Now, with your current customers, like you said, there's a range in terms of who that audience is. How do you go about getting a sense of what their expectations are and getting the voice of that customer into your work? Is it, do you have specific ways? Are there formal or informal ways that you actually go about getting that perspective brought in?
That's a fantastic question, because I think particularly when you're in the B2B space, it can be quite difficult to get the voice of the customer and to really understand what they're needing, as well as what their customers are needing from you. And that's an ongoing effort. At Mastercard, we call it our relentless focus on the customer. And that doesn't just mean our own customers, but the end users and the people that they are invested in having success with, right? So how do we do that? There are a lot of different ways, and some of them quite formal. We have a user advisory group, the UAG, that gets together once a month, and we talk to them very closely around their experiences with our platforms and our services, and get a lot of feedback that way. We then have developers that we need to get feedback from. That's a sort of constant effort to make sure that we're getting out there and talking to people as they're implementing, as they're using things. Where are you having problems? To make sure that it's contextual and that people have a lot of opportunities to talk to us as they're working with our solutions. We also do a lot of user testing. We do a lot of focus groups, a lot of remote user testing now, which has been um, really interesting, because we've started to invite folks around Mastercard to listen to our user testing, to just kind of sit and be, fly on the wall and
Mhm.
absorb, and then feedback on what they've seen and what their insights are from those sessions, which has been really eye-opening, I think, for everyone involved, because you get to see what's happening with a part of the organization that you might not be involved with. And I think that's always valuable. And I think some of the insights across the board with regard to the way that customers talk, no matter where they are, the way that consumers talk in particular, is so valuable, because we don't think about it until we see it.
Mhm.
So really bring that to life, and to help make sure that people have the opportunity to listen to user testing has actually been one of my mandates for last year, and will continue to be something that I work on this year.
So who's part of the user advisory group?
It's a lot of our customers, and we have a lot of different types of customers. I mentioned issuers and acquirers, which people, you shouldn't know what that is unless you work in finance. It's okay. We'll just say banks. A lot of banks, depends on the roles that they play with us. A lot of banks, a lot of financial institutions are our customers, but we also work very closely with Google. We work very closely with Apple. We have a lot of initiatives with both of those groups, and we call them, what do we call them now? DAX was the acronym. We have our own internal lingo for everything that we
Mhm.
try to keep out of the things that we say
Uh-huh.
externally. But we have a lot of large digital tech partners that we work with across the board on many, many, many different things, and those are our customers too. So we have to make sure that we're not just thinking about what the banks think and what the banks need to know about, but it's also our partners at Google, our partners at the big tech firms, and what they need and how we can help them. We also have kind of a growing, and I think everyone does, a growing small to medium business group that we're trying to work with and empower, particularly during the pandemic. So that's another real push for us, a real um, initiative that we're trying to get behind is how do we really listen to them, because they are so varied
Yeah.
and there are a lot of different needs. They have a lot of different pain points, a lot of unmet needs that we still need to figure out what those are and how we can best connect with them.
Mm.
Yeah, when you have so many different voices that you need to consider, how do you prioritize, what ways to incorporate those different voices?
Yeah, and it can be really difficult, right? It depends on how many channels you have for folks. How many ways do you have to reach them?
Mhm.
Um, how do you meet them best where they are? Because that's kind of how you can infuse the language that you use with the most personal tone and terminology, right? So a small business owner is not going to speak the same way that city might,
Mhm.
but they're still both our customers. So it all depends on kind of how we're speaking to them and where we're speaking to them, and being able to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like it's probably a lot of different layers of content and touch points to maintain. Do you have the resources you need to sort of maintain all of that, or like everyone, do you have your own resource challenges?
What do you mean? I have all the resources that I would ever need.
Yeah, dream job.
Everything is great. No, of course we don't. But I think what's wonderful about Mastercard that I really have seen sort of flourish since I started 4 years ago is that there is so much of a focus now on content, and everyone understands that it's important. I don't think anyone questions that. Whereas I know that I've been other places where content was just, I don't know, it felt like being on the hamster wheel, just like churn it out, make it happen, do it, do the thing.
Yeah.
Um, right. But it feels
Mhm.
like at Mastercard, at least like when I started, I was like, oh, I'm the only content person here, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Right now that I have kind of been around for a little while and met a lot of folks around the organization, I'm definitely not the only content person there. We have a whole giant group of technical writers who are all amazing. We have another group that manages our platform for our B2B customers and our user advisory groups and those relationships, and they are amazing. My friends in marketing and marketing communications and product communications are amazing. And I think what's great about it is that we all want to make it clear to whoever we're speaking to, this is how this works. This is how what you're going to get out of it. This is how we can help you get more out of it. If you have any questions, this is where you can go. All of us know that it's about making sure that people have the right information at the right time so they can make the right decision. And that decision needs to be moving forward with us so that we can continue to drive preference. So as long as we all stay focused on that goal, I think it can be really helpful to achieve alignment across a wide organization. But I don't feel like I'm alone, and I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, that's really key. Yeah.
I'm curious, you talked about how you kind of got your start, your background is in marketing, and then you moved over to products and services. Do you have any specific takeaways from your time in the marketing world, either strategies or tactics that might be considered, content marketing tactics that you carry with you and apply day to day now in a different role?
Oh wow, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I definitely, and I almost exclusively have hired folks. Keep saying folks because I'm folksy. With a marketing background,
Mhm.
because I think it gives you a lot of experience with uh, like SEO, right? Like the understanding the language that you're trying to target, understanding what people's search terms are. And I use the analogy of like when I talk to my children, like my 4-year-old, he doesn't know every word that I know, right? But I know the words that he knows. I know his vocabulary. So I will deliberately target my language to him and the words that he knows so that he can comprehend what I'm trying to say. Same with
Mhm.
my 6-year-old too. Same thing. And I think that that is something that I learned in marketing, and that is something that I bring always to the table is, are people going to understand this? And not that people um, don't have the same, we don't all have the same mental models or the same terminology. We do mostly, but we don't always. But it is, if someone is busy, they're trying to get through something quickly, they're trying to pay for something. Nobody wants to spend a lot of time paying for something. Nobody wants to spend a lot of time securely transferring data from one place to another. You just want to get it done and move on. And the more you think about it, I think the more that it can make you feel like things aren't going the way that they need to be, right? So how do we make sure that we're optimizing for those experiences? How do we make sure that we're helping people to feel supported and letting them know that um, this is what you're getting out of this experience. This is what we're doing for you, but not kind of belaboring the point. And I
Mhm.
think that marketing really teaches you that. How do you get across the benefits in a quick, simple, punchy way without talking too much, which is probably what I am doing right now.
The point of this conversation is to talk, but yes, in the context of goals, I think actually one of my favorite things to do is to take something that's in multiple paragraphs and bring it down to a sentence or two and feel like it says the same thing.
That is my greatest pleasure with my job. I find, especially like taking something that somebody gives you, because they'll give it to you, like they'll be like, "Can you fix this? I can't anymore. I can't." And like
Mhm.
simplifying it, running it through Hemingway, and like showing them, like, "Look what I did here. Look, now anybody can read it." And I think too, when you're working for a global audience, it really helps for things to be as simple and clear as possible. I just heard the other day from a woman who's on the COVID-19 task force for the U.S. government. She was like, "We get the optimal level of translations when we're writing at a fifth grade level." And I thought that was really interesting input, because we translate, a lot of our stuff, a lot of our content. So aiming for fifth grade is really difficult. It's really hard to do. But if you can do it, I think it eases the cognitive load on everyone. Because
Mhm.
frankly, I think all of us are really distracted at the moment. In general, we are, but it's particularly right now. So making sure that it's easy for folks to really grasp things quickly and move on to the next thing, or ask the right questions so they can move on to the next thing is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially with when you're mentioning writing at a fifth grade level, that eliminates the jargon, that eliminates the sales speak that everyone's saying, and kind of it helps you differentiate even more because you're literally saying what you need to say and not trying to jazz it up.
Right. Right.
Um, with COVID, so you mentioned the COVID-19 task force. How did that impact you in 2020? From a business perspective, obviously things were changing. Everyone's kind of pushing for a more digital experience now. Did you find your workload greatly increasing? Did you have to shift some strategies? How did that play out for you?
Another fantastic question. It was very hectic at the beginning. I had a lot of global teams, right? A lot of 6 a.m. meetings and 9 p.m. meetings and craziness, while also dealing with, all the children here and my husband here, and trying to figure out who does what when. So
Mhm.
personally, that was my challenge. But professionally, there was a lot of effort made to help people understand contactless payments. And I was a big part of some of that in the beginning. I was trying to make sure that we were crafting our messaging, making sure that we're using the right terminology, and kind of aligning with all of our partners across the organization around how we talk about that, and how we kind of frame those things up, and then how we educate all of our partners around the language that we prefer to use. So that was a big part of my work in the first couple of months
Mm.
uh, of the pandemic, once we were all home. So yeah, I think, and because digital payments have gone up, and there's even more of them now, and people are using Apple Pay, which is built in part on our rails. It's actually been kind of great, because we want people to stop using cash. We want the world to be cashless. There are so many benefits to not using paper money, and it feels like people are starting to pick that up and understand it, and it's becoming a movement now. So
Mhm.
that's really exciting.
Yeah, it is.
You said that you feel like in the last couple years that more folks have sort of come to understand the importance of content. Has your own perspective on content changed in terms of what it means, how it functions, how it's more of a cross-functional effort than a siloed one?
So many good questions. That's so great. Yes. And I wouldn't have said that until you just asked me that question, and I realized that I do feel differently about content than I did. I mean, certainly than I did 4 years ago, before I started working at Mastercard. I think I came in with this idea that only I can do content. I am the content person.
Uh-huh.
I am the subject matter expert, and every experience is a content experience, and you need me, and you can't make an experience without me. And if you do, it's gonna suck. Right. And we're not wrong. I think I've heard that from a lot of people. And I think we're definitely very necessary. But as I went about the work of showing value, and making sure that people understood that having a content person was necessary, I then experienced the onslaught of interest in partnership with me and my team, because I didn't have a team the first like year and a half. Once I did finally get a team, that all of us experienced the onslaught of interest, and we really had to start to think about teaching a man to fish, or teaching a woman to fish, or teaching anyone to fish, right? How do we do this? How do we help others help themselves? And so a lot of the work that's been going on over the past year, but particularly since the pandemic, has been how do we make some information available to people who don't have one of us, because there's not that many of us and we have a lot of teams. So how do we start to codify, hey, we've learned this from this product that we've worked on and tested a bunch, and legal will never let us say this, we want to document that. And also on this other product, we learned that this thing is really great. So we put together what we're calling a style guide, but it's eventually going to be folded in to a larger pattern library, digital pattern library, around like, this is the best way to collect an OTP, right? A security code if you have to enter a code. This is the language that we prefer to use based on all this research that we've done, all this in-market feedback and testing, all that stuff, to make sure that it's in one spot and available for people to pick up and run with. And I think I've also, having worked with a lot of our designers for a while now, developed these relationships where I'm like, you can go and write it. Make sure you're not using lorem ipsum, put some words in. I'm not going to judge you. Let me see what words you have, and then I'll fix it. Right? We'll fix it together.
Right.
But empowering them to use words and to know that it's important, versus, oh, I'll just make a box and you can fill it in later. Because if you're not thinking a little bit about what you're trying to communicate, you're going to have to redo the whole thing. And I think that has become really clear. But I definitely don't think that that I'm the only person who can do content. I think it's important to let others do as much as they can, get as far as they can, and then step in when it makes the most sense.
Yeah, I love that you're still the content expert, but part of being a content expert is enabling other folks to be at least better content professionals than they were before, or to be more effective in the way they're doing that. And what you said there about the sort of evolving the style guide into a pattern library from a content perspective, I think that's brilliant, because style guides feel like more of like a reference that you go to when you maybe are second guessing something, but it's not part of your operations. Whereas a pattern library is something you reference as you're doing your work. And if the content patterns are right there along with all the other brand or UI patterns, then they just are more connected and more integrated in the creation process.
Yeah, I like that.
Absolutely.
We like to seek inspiration from unexpected places. And so one of the questions that we like to ask our guests as we wrap up is, where do you find inspiration?
It's an interesting question, because like I said, I have 2 small children, and I feel like I don't do much for myself. Like if I brush my hair, I'm like, ooh, self-care. But I think I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I think fiction mostly. And I think that that's a real source of inspiration for me, is just hearing how people speak and how people use language, especially when it's in your ear, like in an earbud. I don't know, it makes me pay attention so much more to the cadences of words and conversation. And I like to start to think about how that applies to the rest of the work that I do. Like when I'm working on something, it's like, oh, if I were talking to someone in this work conversation, what would I say? And what would my cadence be? And what would my tone be? And sort of trying to take it back to that and think more about those inflections and how we can translate those to the page or to the screen, to make it feel more like it's a back and forth, like an exchange of information, like a progressive disclosure versus kind of just dumping things on people.
I love that. Yeah. Well, this has been fun. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, this has been